Welcome, I'm Ken Q, and this is a summary of a behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development session that we had with some participants at Tryg, which is a Norwegian insurance company. And you can see a video that shows the entire session that we had, including all the stops and the starts and delay. In this video, I'm simply going to summarize the outcomes of that session so you can see what a session might come out with. So first, let me share the context. Here is the context diagram for this system. A user is going to get onto a website and apply for car insurance. This is to replace the existing call-in application process. Now, this application communicates with an external data provider, the National Vehicle Database. Because that's an external provider, in our acceptance tests, when we automate them, or even if we run them manually, we'll want to have a test double for the National Vehicle Database. And they already have this for other purposes. Here is the flow that the user is participating in. They first enter their driver data, i.e. who they are. And the story we're going to talk about is about entering the vehicle data, simply by providing the chassis number. Once that's done, then there's going to be determining the insurance quote and obviously having the user review the quote and determine whether they want to buy the actual product. So let's look at our feature file, the file that contains the scenarios that were developed. Our feature is going to be a chassis number search. And here's the story. Search for the chassis number to find a detail on a car when buying car insurance. Currently, we can only search for the registration number. And now there's a one-to-one match in that public National Vehicle Database between the registration number and the chassis number. And the application is going to search and present the information regarding the vehicle. Well, there's our story. Let's take a look at a few of the scenarios in this. First, we have a domain term, the chassis number. Our product owner, our subject matter expert, says that valid chassis numbers are 17 digits or letters. And so we're going to come up with variations of this so that we have some checks that can be done at the user interface level and also at the core application level to make sure that our chassis numbers are correct, or at least formatted correct. So we have a 17 character string. Yes, we say it's valid. Perhaps there has to be digits in it. We could have variations of this to show what letter or what positions require digits and what require letters. And then obviously you're going to have something that is one before it, i.e. 16 digits long and or 17 letters long to check for our length. Now, here is our happy path, our main flow. While we're filling out an application and that National Vehicle Database contains information as shown, this would be our test double database would have this. With the user searches for that chassis number, then the result is going to be as shown with the make and the model of Ford Transit. And of course, any additional information that would be retrieved and displayed by the application would be shown, such as the weight of the car or the horsepower and so forth. There is our happy path. Let's look at some of the sadder paths. Suppose the chassis number does not have an association with the registration number. So that National Vehicle Database contains a record that has a chassis number, but no registration number for it. So when the user searches for that chassis number, then the message is going to be displayed that says equivalent of no registration number associated with that chassis number. How about if the chassis number is not found? So now the National Vehicle Database does not contain any record containing that chassis number. When the user searches for it, then a message will be displayed that says the equivalent of chassis number not found. And what? Because it's possible of the instance that the National Vehicle Database is unavailable. It's down, the internet is down because everybody is watching the latest Stranger Things on Netflix, and so all available slots in the internet are used up with that. So when filling out an application and the National Vehicle Database is not available, the user searches for it, then we're going to display a message that basically says, call us or try again later. That takes care of the stories for our, or the scenarios for our particular story. Now we do have a couple of scenarios that are similar, or in fact could use the same things as the story where they're searching just by the registration number. And so we decided to add these in, make sure that we understood them as well. So we have a scenario to determine whether to insure. So given we've got a vehicle with particular values, such as a Ford Transit, and when we're determining whether we're going to insure it, then the result is going to be yes, we will insure it, and produce a quotation for that insurance. Here is a flow scenario. We've had to get a vehicle from the vehicle database, and we're going to run a business rule on it. So whenever we do business rules, we like to have separate scenarios for those business rules because they can become extremely complicated. So here's our business rule. Should we insure? So given that vehicle data, maybe we just use the make and model, such as the Ford Transit. Maybe we use weight and everything else. Any of that information that is needed to determine whether we should insure it or not would be in this table. And our outcomes would be, yes, we're going to insure it. No, we're not going to insure it. Or that VW microbus, we need to review that, pass it on to an actuary to see whether we should insure it or not. So that concludes our basic scenarios. Let's just show a few more that came up. Here's our domain term registration number. And now we would have had a format for the registration number and what are valid values, what are invalid values, and so forth. Every domain term should have its own domain term scenario that indicates what's valid and invalid. And this can be used, as I mentioned, for user interface tests. It can be used for the interface test. If you pass the domain term to an API that was invalid, it should respond back appropriately. And now, that domain term error message, we showed specific language in each of those error messages. Perhaps we want to separate that out so that we show what error occurred in our scenario, such as just the database down, and then we would show in this table what message we would actually use, such as call us and so forth. And now we can simply change the messages for each particular type of error without having to go back and look at the scenarios themselves. This also provides us a way to, if we have bilingual or trilingual, to show the messages in each of the particular language. Now, one more thing that came up during the session is how about the status of a vehicle? If we get a vehicle information back from the national database, is that really a real vehicle or not? And we're going to have to make the assumption that yes, it is, because it's the responsibility of the national database to ensure that. But the next is there any sort of validation available? Suppose, what happens if the user tries to register a vehicle that is already wrecked? Does the national database keep track of that? We have a question which represents something that we should find out about before starting to say, I think we're getting close to done. Or what if the user tries to register a vehicle that's stolen? How do we prevent that? So now we show the context diagram, what sort of a test double we'll have. We show the flow and where the story fits in the flow. And we show the scenarios, the happy path and some sad path scenarios, as well as some business rules that come up. There you have it, a brief introduction to a real life behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development working session. Thank you very much.